Hi, my name is Kees and I help people from doing to being. And I'm a spiritual teacher and a coach. And today I'm here with a video about the 2 paths to spiritual enlightenment. And about that you should not let you yourself be told that there is other paths to spiritual enlightenment. There are only 2 paths. Okay. And the first one is the path of will or discipline. And the second one is the path of surrender or letting go. Okay. First of all, I want to warn you that I'm a little biased because I'm personally on the second path of letting go and surrender. So wanted to tell that and clarify that. It's a sort of a little bit of an advertisement or a disclaimer beforehand, before we go into sort of the deeper details, which are really important. So what is enlightenment first? Well, what enlightenment is sort of union with source, with everything that is. And how enlightenment unfolds in a person. First of all, I want to say I'm not enlightened, right? Okay, so that's clear. This could in a way be an amateur view. But these are my words as I understand it now. Maybe I'll update this video later. But then I still think it's very worthwhile for you guys to understand it right now. And to understand some of the advice I give related to this video. Because I think everything and every video I've posted is in a way related to this video. Because of my insights, which are related to my path. And I'll tell you a little bit about the other path and how that works. But first, about spiritual enlightenment. So, enlightenment is the union with everything that is, a sort of non-dual experience. And how that manifests is that people that are enlightened do not feel that they have a center or that there is a center. They feel just a field of being, and they feel no sort of what is you or what is me. It's not clear. And of course we can talk like that, we can understand that the different sensations we have, for example, as a non-enlightened person, you can still understand the union of it all, the non-duality of it all. But that does not mean that you, day to day, in your experience, feel that you have a center, right? Usually it's the center of the body or that you're somewhere in the brain. With an enlightened person, he or she does not feel that center. It feels empty, that there's an emptiness of self. So that makes things easier, but in a way harder, because sort of you could say you're fixed with your role, and usually you're inherently happy with that because you see that it's the only way. Where usually a non-enlightened person doesn't understand their role and is trying to fight it a little bit, or is trying to, in an unnatural way, especially if they're stuck in their ego, trying to think what is right and trying to force that on the world or force that on their role. So an enlightened person doesn't have that. And what you see in general is just a very natural well-being, right? A very natural flowing with what is, a very natural wisdom of what is wise in the moment to do or not. Which does not mean that somebody knows everything about the universe, or that is a sort of knows everything about every situation, or knows what is best, or knows that it's, better to marry someone or not, or that person is free of all sins, or cannot do something wrong because they can, and they can feel that it's right to do wrong. You know, this is also a very strange idea, but that happens. As you see with a lot of gurus or spiritual types in the past, especially coming from India to America, with different norms, right? Different values. And so this spiritual enlightenment thing is somehow it's a fab, right? It's something which people feel pulled to. So I feel personally that I'm on that path of enlightenment, not really by choice. It's something which is already in me, you could say. So it's not, maybe I should say it's not a personal choice, but it feels more like a soul choice which has already been made. So, and sort of spirituality is, a lot of people feel that way about spirituality in general, that it's not really a choice, but it's something where you feel a pull from the heart to go into that direction. So now the understanding of these two paths to spiritual enlightenment is very relevant for anybody in spirituality, because there are only two paths. And one, strangely enough, is more popular than the other. So I'll first talk a little bit about the differences between the path of will or the path of discipline versus the path of surrender or letting go. First of all, what is keeping us from enlightenment is the ego. So you have two things. You have your separate will, your separation, and you have sort of the part of you which is already divine or already one. So these two paths have a very different way of making you be one, right? So the path of discipline is focusing you to discipline yourself to only focus and keep your focus, your permanent focus, on your oneness. And the second path, the surrender path, is letting you let go of the ego to be one. So the first of all is sort of dealing, surrender is a sort of, you could say it's a negative approach. It's not negative as in negative positive as we know as sort of that one is sort of more bad for you or something. No, it's more that surrender deals with the ego, to let go of the ego. Because the only thing there is to surrender is the ego. And the path of discipline deals with focusing on your oneness. Because the only thing to focus on, right? The only thing that's true to focus on is oneness. Right? So you discipline yourself in oneness, to be one. And how that usually looks is surrender is sort of kind of like a dance, you could say. It's a sort of, you allow yourself to flow. You allow the creator or God or oneness or whatever you believe in or energy to flow through you without you doing anything. So you sort of give up on the idea of doing. You can now understand why I say from doing to being, because I believe that it is our destiny as humanity to become human beings instead of just human doings, where we just focus on doing all the time. And so surrender, the path of surrender, is a path of surrendering your ego, which means surrendering your actions, means surrendering anything that you want to do, surrendering your will, surrendering your discipline, right? And surrendering yourself in a way that you're one with everything that is. And you're not sort of steering yourself in any way, but you're letting yourself be steered. Whereas the path of discipline, steering, And focusing is extremely important. And all that willpower, which you're surrendering on the path of surrender, you're focusing on that and you're using that willpower to be one. Right? So on the path of discipline or the path of will, what is very important is certain practices. So there are many practices, but you could say yogic practices. Most yogis are on the path of will. And also all the Buddhists are on the path of will. The path of will is extremely popular versus the path of surrender. Right? If you look at what gurus nowadays are talking about, or spiritual teachers are talking about, the popular spiritual teachers tend to talk about the path of discipline. And some of the, you could say, more spiritual guys, right? The not so mainstream spiritual teachers are usually more talking about the path of surrender. And also the classical, most of the classic masters you could read text about are just interested in the path of surrender. There's only one guy or there's one very popular guy who's focusing on the path of will, and that's Buddha. And he tends to be the guy in Western society or in world religion or spirituality. You know, next to Jesus, which his path is so distorted. It used to be a path of surrender. Well, it still is a path of surrender, but it's so distorted by some of the teachings out there that doesn't really feel like an authentic path anymore. Unless you really, really are in contact with, you know, the energy of Jesus and you know what to do. But in general, the Buddhist philosophy is a little bit distorted, but it's not as distorted as the Christian philosophy. And I'm not saying religion, not wanting to offend anybody, but it is meant, you know, to live like Jesus or to live like Buddha, and to think like him or her, not to be him or her, you know, not to do the same things, but be the same person. But that's a little bit of a side tangent, so let's not go there. So in general, the path of discipline is promoted by Buddha, because Buddha realized that in a way the mind is more easily convinced of you need to do things to be happy or to be enlightened, then you need to let go of wanting to do things. Yeah. I haven't met much people that are really on the path of surrender like I have. And I'm curious, so if you are, let me know. But the path of discipline is quite popular, because if you are on a path of discipline, what you tend to do is, for example, meditate or do certain practices with the body maybe, to be more focused, to feel more one, and also to use practices, for example, to be present. So to try to meditate all the time and to do that in a specific way where you're present. In the moment, you're being in the moment, you're recognizing the moment, you're labeling, for example, you're doing noting meditation, or you're doing different types of meditation where you're focused, basically any type of meditation where you're not doing nothing, but you're doing something, you're actually doing a technique, is a path of discipline. And unless you're sort of surrendering and this is somehow flowing in your experience, as this video is for me. So on the path of discipline, it tends to be a slow path. Buddha himself said it's a path of many lifetimes. Many lifetimes of good karma, of building up discipline, of building up certain practices to become stronger and stronger in your presence, in your foundation, in your source. Right? If you look at the path of surrender, it can be very short, very quick. Because it's about letting go of effort. And when you let go of effort, you are already there. And the strange thing is that through the surrendering or the letting go, what happens is a sort of, your ego starts to protest. Which is why this is what you're surrendering. You're surrendering the ego, because the ego, on the path of surrender, the ego will protest. While on the path of discipline, maybe your body, or maybe you're not feeling, your mind starts to protest in a way, like, do I need to do this again, or this discipline again? And you need to be strong, and you need to force yourself and do it, you know? And of course, some of these things start to become habits. So it will become easier, but you start to challenge yourself more and more and more, deeper. This is why people on a path of discipline, if you really want that to do that well, that's a monastic path. It's a really, all the spiritual teachers that really talk about enlightenment from a place of the path of discipline, they all talk about, a very strong meditation practice, several hours a day for several years at least, if not, and they're even thinking, like, is this a possibility for a household or for somebody that doesn't want to spend years in a monastery, but that householder still needs to spend months in retreat. This is how severe the path of discipline is. And I have huge respect for people on the path of discipline, and I will not say that the path of surrender is easier or less hard, because the path of surrender is also hard, but it's in a very different way. Sort of, if you want something, then going into all the actions to do that is kind of difficult. But if you want to let go, right? It's wanting to let go, but because you choose surrender in a way. When you let go of your preference, that preference to want that is also very hard, because it's a fight with yourself. It's a fight with your ego, right? It's a sort of fight with your ego where you say, ego says, I want this, right? And you should surrender, and you surrender that. And then even you should surrender enlightenment itself. Wanting to be enlightened, that should be surrendered on the path of surrender. That's how strong that sort of pull to surrender should be. You want to become natural by itself. You want to let go of anything which is not natural, which is not naturally forming, which is not an expression of oneness itself. Right? Anything which is not directly sort of something which the person has not done, but something which is coming from a deeper place, that is allowed. But anything the person might come up with, or sort of the ego might come up with, it's sort of, well, maybe if that happens, right? So it's a sort of the letting go, keep letting go. And then there are, as you've heard from me, there are different flavors of the path of discipline. And those flavors might be, different teachers, different meditation methods, different ways of going about things. And in surrender, there's also different flavors. And 3 of the flavors I will go into, because traditionally, those are 3 types of yoga, but traditionally there are 4 types of yoga. And yoga means union, or ways to union. And traditionally there's bhakti yoga, which is the surrendering to a god. And sort of God in that way is a sort of device. It's a sort of device in which you let go into. So it doesn't really matter to which god, but if you have a sort of pull to a god, you can surrender to that god in a way. So this is a sort of energetic thing in intentions that you do. And through that, what happens is that you sort of, the only thing you can surrender to that God is your ego. You sort of surrender your non-one self to another energetic form, which is already oneness. And it's a God, so it's a sort of high dimensional being. It's with a high density in which it does not have a certain ego to want to control you. Right? This is a nuance which I put for people that actually want to surrender themselves to a God. Make sure that God is a sort of, that is not an ego God, you could say, that's trying to do its own thing, but that it's a sort of God in which there is no preference. In which there's no preference as in this is good, that is bad. And that doesn't have a certain agenda which does not really resonate with you. But this is the Bhakti Yoga path. And it ends in surrender, because what you do is surrender yourself to God, or to a God. Then you have Jnana Yoga, which is the knowledge yoga, which is where you attain union through knowledge, which is the knowledge of non-duality, knowledge of oneness. And when you realize oneness, the idea is to drop the will. So you end up on a path of surrender because you understand that there is nothing but oneness. So what is there to do? You don't have to do anything. You can just relax, you can just float on life. Be life as life, rest as awareness. That's the core of Jnana Yoga. And then you have Karma Yoga, and Karma Yoga has to do with your outward action. And your outward action to the world is that in which you let go of your reaction to the world. But then you realize that there's also a reaction happening in you, in the mind, and then you let go of that in order not to be biased in your actions. So it ends up being the path of surrender again. And then there is the path of Raja Yoga or Kriya Yoga, which is, the inward action, or the attainment of high states of consciousness. And that is traditionally, that's a path of discipline through meditation and through certain practices. So it does not matter to me which you are called to, whether you are called to the path of surrender or the path of discipline. But it does matter that you understand that if you are just, let's say, a normal person that is interested in spirituality and you're meditating, which has many benefits, then in a way you're doing a version of the path of discipline. Right? You're taking action like you're on the path of discipline. And this is what a lot of people do. So many people in the world are doing a sort of weak version of the path of discipline. And of course, some people are having great results with that, as in that they're more relaxed or their ego is boosted. And some people are even having sort of deeper spiritual attainments or spiritual experiences or realizations through the path of discipline, doing that as a householder or a layman, somebody that just sits a little bit and is meditating. And personally, I had my spiritual awakening through the path of discipline, actually, because I was just doing meditation and reading books and things like that and thinking about being present. But then in my spiritual awakening, I realized that something else was meant for me. And that was the path of surrender. And actually, after my spiritual awakening, I could not discipline myself, even if somebody put a gun on me. Because it was just so clear for me. It felt so right for me to surrender and to keep surrendering. And surrendering everything I felt in my system that was not okay with that moment, felt like that is the thing to dive into. That is the thing to surrender, to love, to let go of. And that is basically the ego. Because, like I said, if you're on the path of surrender, you're finding yourself challenged by the ego in a way that the ego wants something from you. And you say, well, let's see, And you're sort of challenging the ego in a way, like, I hear you, but that's not what we're going to do. In this way, you keep surrendering your will and your ego until there's nothing left but divine action, until there's sort of a permanent basis in source, until it dissolves in source. Where on the path of discipline, what happens is that we're so focused on source, and being in source and being the source, that at some point we are just that, and then we dissolve as well. But that is a sort of focused effort, where with surrender, in a way you could say that surrender is also a focused effort, but it's a focused effort to let go of will and to let go of anything that is separate. So it's a sort of practicing, you could say it's practicing the enlightened state. Because when you are enlightened, you automatically realize that all this discipline bullshit, is not relevant. Like the one of the most famous attainments through discipline was that of the Tibetan saint Milarepa. And Milarepa was a saint that went for many years, he secluded himself and just lived in a cave and meditated and was visited by, many gods. And, I've read his story, it was very interesting thing. But he was famous, this was the meditation master who, went on fasting, just fasting for months, and then meditation and just eating some nettles and, that's it. Very much austerity based, discipline based living until his attainment of enlightenment. And then he just went in the city and in villages laughing at people that were meditating, like, what are you doing this practice for? Just be one, just be God, just be this. And of course, he was in a way laughing at himself and his own effort. But whether you go about through the path of effort like he did, in the end, he'll end up being one with life, so having to do nothing. And that's the whole sort of, there's no right and wrong in these two spiritual paths. But one thing is for sure, that we end up at the same place as sort of the path of surrender. We end up that there is nothing to surrender, that there is just one. And that there is no sense of a center of a person. So you could say the path of surrender is practice in enlightenment, where, you could also say the same thing actually from the path of discipline, because you're focused on that and you're practicing as well. But it feels sort of in a different way because you're efforting, where the path of surrender feels more at ease. So it also very much depends and if you talk to people about this, very much depends on what their perception is, because somehow, some way, they will feel attracted to one of these paths. And I personally sense, but maybe this is my path of surrender preference, that one already feels in flow and feels sort of predetermined, while the other isn't, or does not feel like that. So I hope this clarifies things. I hope this video helps, and let me know if you have any questions for me. If you like the video, like the video, press the thumbs up, or if you're interested in seeing more videos like this, then subscribe or hit the bell button, because every time I upload a video, you'll get a notification. And if you're interested in my grounding meditation and my newsletter, then click below. I left a link there so you can check it out. And also you see the links to my Dutch courses, mindfulness, letting go of limitations, and freedom, aka non-duality. And I hope you enjoy them and enjoyed the video. Let's evolve together. And I'm so grateful for your support with my channel and in general in life. Thank you so much.